talking, it's only showing you. All right, we are live right now in our Facebook group, and so, oh, excuse me, I'm going to turn this down. I'm going to have. I want to follow this. So every time when you're talking, it's okay. So I'm going to follow the feed on Facebook Live. If there are any questions or comments, I'll be paying attention to those. And I've invited people to watch us live through the group and also be able to ask any questions as you're going. So let me first say hello to everybody who might be watching us, whether live or on the replay. I'm Barbara Carr with Fuse Empire, and today I am interviewing Isaac Carr from CCSK Law. And Isaac is going to be talking to us today about the top 5 ways to limit your liability. And actually, before we jump into this, I want to check, Isaac, yours looks a little bit blurry to me. Does, like, your picture, does it look blurry on your side or no?
My picture doesn't look blurry, but there's like a little bit. I think it's the bandwidth.
Okay, got it. Okay. Mine is saying Isaac's network bandwidth is low. Is yours saying mine is?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we're using the same bandwidth. Obviously, Isaac is also my husband. And so we're at home because of coronavirus. But we are going to jump into this because most of the people who are watching this are business owners. In fact, I would think that most of the people, probably all the people that are watching this are business owners, because this is inside of a private group specifically for business owners. We have a couple of people watching right now. So I just want to remind you that if you are watching, and if you have questions for Isaac as he goes, feel free to put them in the chat on Facebook, and I will make sure that he gets those. And as we get started here, I want to first describe some of the great things that CCSK Law does, and Isaac, before we jump into this topic. Like I said before, you guys know Isaac is my husband, and I know it sounds like I might be biased, but let me tell you why I'm not. Because even before Isaac and I started dating, we were friends, and we worked with a lot of the same clients, and we'd refer people back and forth to each other. And Isaac was the only attorney I had ever met in my life that wasn't boring and didn't make law sound boring. and many of you probably can relate. Anyone who's not in the field of law, we don't get excited about contracts. In fact, I think we do the exact opposite. Sometimes when we hear about contracts, we get a little tense. But Isaac loves contracts. In fact, I wonder if he loves them more than he loves me. I'm just playing. I know better than that. But CCSK Law is, they stand strong on their values, and they're there for the community, and they do so many things for people, regardless of if people have thousands of dollars. Like, I know a lot of lawyers charge you just to be able to talk to them. And one of the things I appreciated, even way back before Isaac and I became what we are now, is that they were willing to talk to you for free. They do free consultations there, and it's been very helpful over my business career. And even I had gone through some stuff that I needed family law advice on, and they have an awesome family law attorney. They've got a great estate planning attorney. They've got really awesome attorneys, and I'm gonna let Isaac share a little bit about that at the end of this meeting. For those of you who might need some legal help, he'll touch on that at the end of our meeting here on the different services and practice areas that they really could help you guys in, even more so than law or business law, because Isaac specializes in business and real estate. So Isaac, you have a presentation that you call the top 5 ways to limit your liability. And that's what we're talking about today. Can you give us a little bit of insight of what we're looking at hearing today?
Sure. Well, I like the insight that you gave into saying that hopefully I can make this a law is not platform. Right? I am considered an entrepreneur with a law degree. That's what we like to refer to ourselves, and the perspective that we come when we're talking to our business owners and our clients, because law is only one part of what is going to pick up your business. The business is made up of a lot of different things, including insurance and accounting, and making sure that your investments are done properly, as well as actually maintaining clients, marketing, and there's a whole world of different aspects, and law is just one part of it. So we take it from an entrepreneurial standpoint, kind of look at the whole of it and see where we can help simplify the law to break it down, make it hopefully a little bit more advertising and appealing to people who normally don't get that aspect of the law. So many attorneys aren't known as dry, right? They'll come in and they'll tell you the law from a legal aspect, and it just, the client will walk out paying a lot of money without really understanding what they're getting. And so today we're going to be talking about the top 5 ways to limit your liability, which some of them include legal aspects and some of them are even outside the law. They're part of that other part of the sphere that makes up your business, but they're all important to make sure that the foundation of your business is strong so that you are as protected as you possibly could be while you're moving forward with growing your business. And this I've implemented these 5 steps into a lot of different industries. I'm talking like real estate to lawn care businesses to creative professionals like photographers and videographers to even like consultants and other types of professionals. So there's a whole lot of businesses that really utilize these in some fashion, right? So the priority might be different on each one that we go over, determined on what industry you're in, and the way that you need to have those apply is going to be different. But the fundamental concept is still going to be the same because we're talking about risk. How do you approach risk? So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, is top 5 ways to limit your liability.
That sounds really awesome. And I know that as a business owner myself, we don't really think about those things all the time of, are we protected or how can we more protect ourselves? We're usually focused on the things that we're good at, right? And that we're providing service to other people. So let's jump right into this. What is this first tip on how we keep ourselves protected?
Right. So I always like to let people know that risk within itself is what we're talking about. The risk is what you open yourself up to. Liability is the consequence of that risk. Right? So we are really talking about aspects of approaching risk, but we want the consequence to be limiting your liability as much as possible. So if we approach it in that approach, and a lot of business owners are going to really understand this first step, is to watch who you work with. You could literally do everything right in your business, but if you work with the wrong person, that can ultimately, you can end up in court, or you can end up losing a lot of money. You could end up really having stress and a lot of headache. It comes from working with the wrong person. And like I said, even if you did all of the other 5 steps perfectly, or the other 3 steps, or 4 steps perfectly, and everything was done properly, if you work with the wrong person, none of it really matters because you're going to end up in court, even if you're right. And so there's 3 different ways to watch who you work with. Number 1 is to have a good filtering system, right? And I'll say filtering system. There's multiple ways that you can use to make sure that you're weeding out those bad apples. If you're in real estate, it might be using a tenant application. If you're hiring employees, it's going to be an employment application. It's going to be interviews. When I sit down with the client, there's certain keywords that I listen for. Those are filtering systems. If I hear somebody say, hey, I just want to do it right. Ding, that checks off for me. That's something that says, yeah, this is the type of client I want to work with. If I have somebody who says, hey, can we hide some of this money from the IRS? Okay, no, that's a red flag, right? That's I don't want to work with that person. And that's a filtering system that I use. I listen for those keywords when I'm going into some type of interview. But like I said, you're able to use a lot of applications or other types of paperwork to determine a filtering system. And one of the biggest ones for people out there under filtering systems, money. If somebody doesn't want to pay you money, like, again, if you're a real estate, it's going to be a security deposit. If you're a business owner, maybe charging half down before you start the work, right? As an attorney, I don't get paid until after I earn the work. However, I utilize as a filtering system, I request a certain amount down. After, as you mentioned, the free initial consultation. Of course we do that. But afterwards, when I give you a quote, you say, okay, this is what's going to take to move forward. I don't always need the whole thing down, but asking people to put down a little bit of a retainer is going to help them make sure that I'm working with the right people, so they're more connected with what I'm doing for them. That is an important part. And so a lot of business owners need to make sure that they are asking for something appropriate. And if someone says, hey, can I just pay you later? Like, yeah, I can start the work later too. I mean, it doesn't need to be contentious. This can be just your policy that you have in place. Hey, I have an obligation to my partners, to my other clients, to my family. I have an obligation to really uphold my business to a certain standard. And one of those policies that we have in place is that we have to have 50% down before we start, or 25% down, or we have to have this. And that will stop those people who never intended on paying you in the first place, or were going to cause problems, or just trying to use you for free advice. It kind of weeds them out. So that's in terms of the top ways to limit your liability for watching who you work with. Number one is having a filtering system. Number two is trusting your gut. Honestly, if you get a bad feeling about somebody, you might not be able to pin it down in a filtering system, but if you get that feeling, you're probably right. Get out of there. That's even if they come with an enticing amount of money. I know I have been in that situation where I knew I shouldn't take on this client. I knew this client was going to be more hassle. I didn't know why, but they could pay. And you know what? I didn't really have any objective reason, but you know what? It turns out I was picking on something subconsciously, or I was right. I was right on. This person really just try to take advantage of the advice that we give and try to build that relationship, because we go for a long-term relationship here. And some people just have that short-term gain insight, and you can feel that oftentimes in that initial meeting. So trusting your gut is number two. Number three is working with the right people. Wrong people are going to refer more wrong people. Right people are going to refer more right people. So if you work with a good team of professionals, like your accountants and your insurance agents and these people who might be referring over to you, but your referral sources might be realtors, they might be financial advisors, they might be other clients, right? The people that you work with will refer more people like them, if that's who they hang out with, right? And so if you hold a certain standard and you work with those right people, they're going to refer more right people. If you work with those wrong people, I'll tell you, the word will get spread around of, hey, you won't believe how much they took advantage of this guy, right? You should definitely go there. He's going to be able to do that. I'm stating things bluntly. I don't know if they would actually talk that way, but the premise is the same. So in terms of the number one way to limit your liability is to watch who you work with, using filtering systems, using your gut, and using the ability to work with the right people.
Thank you, Isaac. That was such good information, because and as that being the foundation of these top 5 ways seems super important, because I think we've all been in instances where something just didn't feel right about somebody. And sometimes, especially when you're newer in business, whether you like it or not, you may feel a desperation of, well, this person has money to pay me, even though I know they're going to drive me nuts, or take too much of my time, or not appreciate me, or whatever that is. And so you may feel the urge to take whatever money comes your way. It took me many years to learn that I did not have to put up with people like that. And I've been blessed enough to, now I've been doing business for over a decade, but I have been blessed that now I get to do business with all kinds of people who not only appreciate what I do and value what I do, but they tell other awesome people like themselves about the things that I do. And so I just get an abundance of wonderful clients that I truly love working with. So I agree that those are some awesome tips, and it's a great foundation for these 5 ways. So what's number 2 then? What's our way to limit our liability?
All right. Number 2 is my favorite topic, contracts. All right. So I know a lot of people, they go ugh when they hear the word contracts, but me, I get pulled towards it. And the reason is this, something that a lot of people can relate to. A contract really reflects the relationship that you want to have with that person. I say this, every business relationship that you have should have a piece of paper that reflects the expectations and accountability if someone fails to meet those expectations. Those should all be written down. Come up with the relationship. What's the relationship you want to have? What are you expecting of that person? What should they expect of you? What happens if they fail to meet those expectations? And then literally get on the same page with a document, a contract. All right? That is the fundamental premise. I believe that contracts protect relationships by clearly outlining expectations, so that if it is done on a handshake, you don't come back later and say, I thought you were supposed to take care of this. No, you only, I'll take a contractor, for example, a general contractor. I thought you hired, if I'm a general contractor, like, well, no, you said that I just needed to paint this wall. And then I'm the client, I'm thinking, no, I asked you to replace the wall, right? I asked you to replace the whole thing. Those are 2 very different things. I was like, yeah, your quote was fantastic, right? You can paint this whole wall for just $100. right? Okay, and I was thinking, oh, you can replace this whole wall for $100. Okay, completely different premises. So writing down clear expectations like the scope of work of your services, the payment, when payment needs to be made, what happens if someone fails to pay, right? Where do you go from there? Making sure that those expectations are made clearly. If somebody wants changes to those works, right? If someone wants to make a change, how do they make that change? Fill out a change order? Or is there some type of request that they make in a formalized document? Again, getting everything written down clearly lays out those expectations. However, one of the most important aspects of these expectations and why it's really important, and number 2 in the top ways to limit your liability, is because you can shift the burden of risk in some of those expectations. What do I mean by that? So in a contract, you're able to say, it is your responsibility to take care of this. A photographer, all right, you've hired me to take the pictures, not to edit them. I'm just taking the pictures. If you want them edited, that's on you. Now, if you want to hire me to do that, you can do that. But see, that's the shifting the burden of risk. If you're shipping a product, right, whose burden is it to pay for insurance when it's in transport? Whose responsibility is it to actually transport it? Does the client need to come to the office to pick it up, or are you shipping it to the client? If it gets damaged along the way, who's paying for that? Right, you're shifting the burden of risk. A contract that people don't realize is a type of contract here is really disclaimers, right? A lot of disclaimers say, watch out, don't do this. They're shifting the burden of risk, saying, hey, we told you about this. That was on you to take care of. Whether that's a disclaimer on your website or a disclaimer on your product, but terms and conditions on your website is a relationship. It is on you if you click on something and it takes you to some weird third party or whatnot. Like we do our best to maintain these things, but we shift the burden of risk. With tenants, it's your responsibility to take care of the driveway when it snows. So if someone slips and falls, whose responsibility is that? You shifted the burden of risk onto the tenant, or you kept it as the property manager and make sure that you're doing that appropriately. So pick an industry, and every contract, there should be a contract in place for every relationship, and you need to make sure that it clearly lays out those expectations and accountability, and then further, make sure that those expectations are clearly defined of who's taking on what risk and when. Those are key aspects that everybody needs to take care of. And I'll say one last snippet on contracts is that a lot of people think about the most complex legalese out there. There is a huge movement in the modern court system and statutes and everything to really simplify the law so people can understand it. A lot of times I'll draft up a contract that is easy to read. Right? Now, that doesn't necessarily have to do with the fairness. I can write an incredibly legalese Shakespearean contract that is really, really fair. And then I can write a really friendly agreement that everybody understands, but it's really one-sided, right? So fairness and tone are two different things, but the tone can be simple and straightforward with your clients, and it can build a lot better relationships. So you're promoting your business while also protecting it, right? So making sure that it's in friendly language, that the font matches your website, that the color scheme matches your color scheme for your business, and that your logo is at the top. An aesthetic appeal, making it friendly and more approachable can actually help your business while laying out those expectations clearly. And so, again, those are some of the big reasons that I am a fan of contracts, and also why it's number 2 in the top ways to limit your liability.
Thank you, Isaac. And I definitely know how much you love contracts. And for the audience out there, I'll share with you, clearly I have a bit of an advantage because I'm married to an attorney. So I sometimes get advice from him just in the comfort of our living room or our bedroom or our dining room or whatever. But when it's time to execute those contracts and those things, my business partner and I hire CCSK Law because we don't want to take advantage of the relationship just because I'm married to an attorney, right? We still want to be able to work together with the law firm. But one of the things I learned through Isaac with contracts is, like he was saying, sometimes contracts are super confusing to those of us who did not go to law school. And there's times when I want to take things out of a contract because I feel like it's so long, and then Isaac will explain to me why it's important to stay in there, and I'll say, okay, you're right, let's leave that in there. But there's times when, like I'll sometimes say, can we make this contract shorter because this is a one-time thing with this person. This is going to take me a week to complete. I don't want to scare them away, right? And so he'll shorten it down as much as he can, but of course, leaving things in there that protect views, but also protect the person who we're going to work with and make everybody feel comfortable The expectations are clearly laid out. Those of you who have worked with me, you've seen these contracts, you've signed these contracts. Many of them have been either created by CCSK law or walked through or looked over by them. And it's just really helpful to be able to go to an expert. And even if you draft your own contract, you could take it to an expert, whether you have your own attorney or using CCSK law, and they can pick it apart for you and say, this is why you shouldn't have this written this way. Or Isaac has been a real help for our business. And like I said, I get a little bit of an advantage, but when it's time to execute, we definitely hire CCSK law, because there's no way we can do these things on our own, and there's no way we'd want to take advantage of a relationship that we have. So thank you, Isaac, for helping make contracts easier to understand. I like how they used to do his law firm, and I think that you guys still do, but it's not as many of you guys now, the tips from the bar. And they use they have a sign that says no legalese, which again, back when Isaac and I were friends, I loved that because I didn't understand the legal language. Like, I wanted to be able to listen and understand, and I was able to, because they talk at a level that even though they're experts and they know all that legal jargon, they talk in a way that us normal people that don't know all that can actually understand and relate to, and we're not confused by what we're buying. So all right, so Isaac, we're moving on to tip number 3 now.
All right, number 3. So I'll say that there's some things that you can't shift over in a contract. There are certain things that, specifically like negligence, that you can't blame the other side for, right? If it's a product and I'm manufacturing it and I manufacture it wrong, I can't blame that on the consumer, right? If I'm providing legal services and I provide bad advice, I can't blame that on the client, right? There are some things that, and we're human, we make mistakes. And so the things that we can't shift the burden on, we insure, right? We get insurance for. So aspects of that, for the negligence, for the things that you can't control, that's where you get insurance in place. Right. And again, this is something that's not technically within the legal realm. I mean, insurance is technically a contract between you and this private company, but fundamentally, there are insurance agents who help set this up to make sure that it is as binding as it needs to be, or that you're as protected as you need to be when you're getting these insurance plans. There's tons of different types of insurance. I mean, some of them are the ones that people have heard a lot about, like either life insurance, which is helpful for a buy-sell agreement. If me and you are in a partnership and something happens to you, how am I going to buy out your estate? How am I going to buy that out? I might not just have tons of money sitting there. Well, insurance can help fund that. So, but also like disability insurance is also something that people overlook when they're looking at a buy-sell. Because oftentimes you're more likely to become disabled than you are to die. So what happens if somebody becomes disabled? How am I going to pay for that person to buy them out? Right. So there's life and disability insurance, but there's also like property casualty insurance. Right. If you have an office space, you got to get premise liability insurance. Right? You need to make sure that you have that insurance to cover that. But what about your stuff? Well, if you're renting, you get renter's insurance. Right. Vehicles. This is something people overlook quite a bit. When you're driving, if you are actually driving for the purposes of business and you're using that vehicle for business purposes, your private insurance can actually reject your claim if they find out about that, if they know about that. So now I'm not talking about like the employee going to work. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if you normally if you're a contractor and you're using your personal truck to do business work, to go install things at people's houses, yeah, that's actually would be required under commercial insurance. It can be expensive, but it's the proper way to do that, because your insurance company didn't create this policy for you to cover commercial purposes. They did it for residential purposes, just normal driving around in your personal life. Insurance is a big aspect, and it can be expensive depending on what industry you're in. Some industries it's a lot less because there's not a whole lot out there. At CCSK law, we always carry malpractice insurance. It's not required by the state of Indiana, but it's heavily incentivized, and we actually wouldn't practice law without it. We require to make sure everybody falls within our malpractice insurance carrier, because we're not perfect, and we've thankfully never had to make a claim or anything like that. But fundamentally, we like to knowing that protection's there, and I sleep better at night knowing that's there. And there's insurance policies between us and the partners at CCSK to make sure we're all protected. And these are extra steps that we take and we advise our clients to take in order to protect their business. It's just that it's going to be different insurance for different industries. So that one is going to be on a case-by-case basis, but there is always insurance that comes into play. And when you're looking at the top 5 ways to limit your liability, it still falls into number 3 in almost every business because of the importance of it.
Awesome. And I know that being that insurance is so important, and obviously CCSK law doesn't sell insurance, but they have relationships with some very reputable insurance reps in the area that cover any kind of insurance that you can think of, right? And so if you're like, listen, I don't know what kind of insurance I need, or if I need insurance, talk to Isaac and he'll give you referrals to insurance companies and agents that they trust and that they work with. And then it's super important to know that, like, as Isaac was saying, we don't all need every kind of insurance for our business, but if we get the wrong kind, it kind of like many of us with Corona right now have been finding out that some insurances, your health insurance or your different types of insurance that you've had, has been being denied on certain things because of what's going on with Corona, right? And so some insurance, knowing what you have is important, and knowing that you have what you actually need. So don't just go out there and just buy any insurance. Make sure that it's the insurance that you need for your company or your industry. And a good way to do that is to talk to an expert. And like I said, Isaac and his firm they do have people that they can refer you to. So Isaac, what is tip number 4 to limit our liability?
All right, so you've worked with the wrong person, right? You didn't have the contract in place, or your contract couldn't shift the liability. Your insurance has a high deductible or has an exception that's not going to cover it. They're denying the claim. All right, you have a backstop, something that stops the liability from getting to you personally, right? And that is called an LLC or a corporation, your limited liability company or your corporate entity. Those are made to stop that liability from getting to you personally. Now, the importance of this is that it's a separate entity from yourself. The concept here is that if somebody went to try to sue you personally, you're saying, whoa, you're not suing me. But you're suing this entity over here. You're suing this separate entity that we set up. All right, now, the setup is pretty simple. You go to the Secretary of State of Indiana, you pay your $97.14 for a limited liability company, and you walk through, it takes 15 minutes, and boom, you've got yourself an entity. But I always say that if you want a court to respect that as a separate entity, you need to respect it as a separate entity. It needs a separate bank account, right? Don't be commingling funds. If you're going to go buy something from Staples, it's office supplies, or contractor materials from Menards, or whatever you're doing, if you're going to go buy something and you're buying some stuff for your personal home as well as some stuff for your business, swipe twice. Swipe once with your personal card to cover your personal stuff, and swipe a second time with your business card to cover your business stuff. Make sure you keep those things separate as possible, because commingling of funds is the #1 way to what's called pierce the corporate veil. That imaginary, if you're saying, look, you're not suing me, you're suing this over here, there's an imaginary veil between you that protects your personal liability. If you commingle funds, you're piercing that, and people are able to get to you personally. So separate bank accounts, an operating agreement for your LLC, or bylaws and shareholder agreement for your corporation. Now, for a corporation, it is required by statute for your corporate entity to actually work. You need to have bylaws. You have to by statute. Now, your LLC does not have to have an operating agreement. But if you don't have one, especially like as a single member LLC, you are more likely to have pierced the corporate veil, because again, you have to follow the corporate formalities. And an operating agreement tells this LLC how to operate. And so if you don't have those procedures in place, it looks a lot like you're just running on your own, right? So bank account, operating agreement, and meeting minutes is another big one. So meeting minutes is something else where you take minutes, even if just you sit down by yourself and saying, hey, I sat down at this time to make this decision, boom. You can keep those meeting minutes, and that's respecting that corporate veil. So again, if someone comes back and says, hey, I'm coming after you personally because maybe you have a big home, or you have other businesses, or you have other assets that they want to get to, you can say, no, you're not suing me, you're suing this entity over here. And they're like, oh, all you did was just pay that $97.14 set up. You didn't really respect it as a separate entity. And you can say, look, I didn't keep a separate bank account, lay down bank records. I didn't keep an operating agreement, lay that down, meeting minutes by myself. I didn't do all this stuff, just me, for fun. I did that because this is a separate entity from myself. And because I respected that as a separate entity, a court will respect that as a separate entity, and they'll agree with what you're presenting there. And that's how you protect yourself. And it matters in different businesses too. If you're going to respect these at 2 different businesses, you need to make sure that they each have their separate bank accounts their own operating agreements. You keep meeting minutes for both. It's important to make sure that you're respecting each entity as a separate entity within itself. So those are some aspects of making sure that your LLC is set up properly, or that your corporation is set up properly. And the final thing I'll say is that there's a lot more than that, right? There are limited partnerships, and there's limited liability partnerships, and there's the professional liability corporations. There's PCs. So there are a lot of different entities out there. Most of the time, for most business owners, I recommend an LLC or a corporation, depending on what you fall into. But there's also a series LLC. That's a new thing in Indiana, just came out a couple of years ago and became effective, where you are able to have multiple subparts underneath a master LLC. And if you have run it properly and it has the same ownership structure, you can actually have it just one tax bill too. So I'm not the tax person. I do hit on taxes a little bit, and I'll hit on one other aspect of taxes that people have questions about, and that's, should I have an S Corp or an LLC? One of the most common questions I get with small businesses. And so I'm going to actually address that one real quick, because when you talk about LLCs and corporations, it always comes up, well, what about taxes? How do I file my taxes? All right. The tax code was redone last time, not the most recent time, but last time, in 1986, where LLCs were still pretty brand new. And so the IRS really didn't consider LLCs into any particular category. There's no, I'm taxed as an LLC. That's not a thing. What they had was sole proprietors and partnerships. So sole proprietor is just you by yourself. Partnership is that you went and you have one other partner and you start doing business. Then they also had corporations that fell into S Corp or C Corp. S and C represent the subchapter of the IRS code that they're talking about, right? And so if really you had those main four, that you're going to either fall into one of these or one of these. So they said LLCs by default will fall into this one. You're either going to be a sole proprietor by yourself, so that means you're an LLC taxed as a sole proprietorship, which basically you file your personal tax return, your 1040 form, there's a Schedule C, you fill that out. This entity, the LLC, is considered disregarded, and you just take it on your personal taxes. You still have limited liability, but for tax purposes, they don't even look at the LLC. For a partnership, it taxes it as a partnership. That means what's called a K1, and you submit that. So the entity isn't completely disregarded, but it's completely passed through. So it passes right through that partnership, and you get that filed. So you're an LLC taxed as a partnership if you have more than one person. So those are by default what it goes into. However, you can get the benefit of both worlds between the S Corp and the LLC if you choose for your LLC to be taxed as an S Corp. So you can file an election to say, actually, I want to have my LLC taxed as an S Corp, and the reason you do that is to avoid some self-employment tax. So there is a way that to pay yourself a reasonable salary, which does get hit with self-employment tax, but everything over top of that avoids that self-employment tax. So if you have $100,000 that you're paying yourself, you can take 60 of that as a reasonable salary, and then there you have $40,000 on top that you're avoiding 15% on. Those are some pretty numbers. I'm doing a big picture thing here. You should always talk with your accountant to get confirmation about which way you should go. Finally, I don't think I haven't come across a good reason why to tax an LLC as a C Corp, even though with the new 21% tax rate on the most recent tax changes they've done, it's a whole new ball game out there. And one thing I've learned from the recent tax changes is that you need an accountant for your business more than ever. So that's an important aspect of that you want to keep in mind as you're moving forward with your business and choosing what entity. Oftentimes, here at CCSK, we try to be team players here, so we work with your accountant to make sure that you are set up properly and your accountant would file that election. And then every now and then, I get a business that is proper for a corporation, whether they have a certain amount of employees or a certain amount of assets or what they're trying to do with their main goals. A corporation makes sense. But that comes down to an attorney's choice, where we would give you an advice based off of a case-by-case basis, and then we would work with your accountant to specifically get if you need to be filed as a Chapter S underneath an LLC or a C Corp.
Awesome. So I want to touch on a few things there, because that was a lot of really great information. And I know a lot of this stuff I didn't know until Isaac entered my life. Again, that was several years ago before we became a romantic couple. But he educated me on a lot of these things. And since then, I've been able to refer people to him, because I now have been able to recognize if somebody needed consultation on this, which I can only give you so much information because I'm not an attorney or a CPA, right? So I could give you some information, but then I say, but you should really talk to an attorney or you should talk to an accountant. And so one of the things is, well, first of all, the LLC, and I don't think Isaac mentioned the EIN because that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the LLC itself, but I had a couple of clients over the past few years that have paid really large amounts of money for somebody to set up an LLC or EIN for them. And I remember when I first met Isaac, somebody I knew, he had actually helped them set up their LLC and their EIN and stuff like that. And he did not charge them a whole bunch of money. In fact, there are many people that he just says, hey, you could just go do it on this website. That's how he showed me how to do it when he and I were just friends. And he said, hey, you need an LLC. He gave me the information. It took me like 12 minutes to set up, and it was less than $100. And he, you know, when I found out people were charging hundreds of dollars to do that for you, I became upset for my clients, right? Like I would tell my clients, oh man, I can't believe you paid for that. You could do it on your own for like $12 or for like 12 minutes, right? It takes like 12 minutes or so. And so I will many times give people that website and say, you know, but then call Isaac, or, you know, even if you have a trusted attorney you're already working with, ask them if they could direct you where to do it rather than, you know, having to pay a lot of money for that. And I know the same thing goes with like contracts. Like I know a lot of people buy contracts online. I would be very careful about that because I bought contracts online before Isaac came along, or downloaded them free and stuff like that. And then he would look at them and be like, you do not realize like the risk that you have with this. And as he'd explain it to me, I'd be like, whoa, I'm glad that I asked you about it because I was just going to pop this up there. I found a free contract or whatever, and it would not have done me justice in court. And I didn't know that I needed an operating agreement for my LLC when I first set that up. And luckily Isaac came in and explained it, and I realized how serious it was. We got our operating agreement and we do our meeting minutes, but all those things that we don't know could actually hurt us if we get caught up in a lawsuit of some sort.
So I'm gonna give some insight into that. Thank you for that. That's really good information for people. I'll say that when you're going to launch your own entity, I do not charge very much if I charge, because if you hire me for something else, oftentimes I will actually just include that as part of a launch. If you hire me to draft up your operating agreement, oftentimes I'm just launching your entity with you anyway, because it is really straightforward to do. When you know what you're doing, though, there are a couple twists in there that you got to watch out for, specifically with regard to manager managed versus member managed, and you do need to clarify if you're a single member or not. That one's pretty straightforward. But there, one of the big ones is the manager managed versus member managed. You really need to know if you are going to be running yourself as the manager managed LLC or a member managed LLC. And I'm not going to jump into all of it today because that's a whole spiel within itself about how to properly set up an LLC. But no, you shouldn't be paying hundreds upon hundreds of dollars to have somebody do that. Or your EIN. The EIN, or sometimes known as the FEIN, is your essentially social security number for your business. That it takes 10 minutes and it's free on the IRS website. Again, it's not difficult to do. These things, we can get your entity set up and moving forward in half an hour, and it might even be approved that same day. They approve it relatively fast. And so there are a couple aspects of it that you want to make sure you do right. And if you need advice on that, because I had a guy, I completely offered. I was like, hey, I'll get your EIN started for free. And you know, I'm just like, you're already hiring me for this stuff. Let me just, he's like, no, I want to do it on my own. I was like, okay, all right. Well, I get a call later that day and he's like, hey, they're charging me for this online. They're charging me. I was like, they're not charging me. Where are you at? And he's like, IRS USA apply.com. I was like, no, it's got to be .gov. You have to go to the IRS.gov website. And so, all right, we hang up, and I was like, I can do this. He's like, no. So he gives me a call back, and like 10 minutes later, he's like, they're charging me. I'm like, no, they're not charging me. Where are you at? He's like, IRSgov.com. I was like, no, it's got to be .gov. Had he just asked me, I would have walked him through that, but I spent more time explaining that to him and trying to get him to the right URL than just doing it myself. So, but it really, other than stumbling on some of those things, just make sure you're on the actual IRS website, you're on the actual Secretary of State website, and that you are getting what you need from that. and that's a natural segue. You talked about the contracts thing. Yeah, very dangerous to find contracts offline. I found, specifically operating agreements, I had a couple that a lot of times banks will require an operating agreement to open up their bank account. So I'm working with this business owner, with these two business owners, and they told me what bank they're going to work at. It was a small bank. I hadn't worked with them before, so I give the bank a call and said, "Hey, do you require an operating agreement?" They said no. I'm like, "Okay, well then we don't need to get you an operating agreement before you go open up your bank account. Why don't you go open up that bank account?" They go to open up the bank account, and the bank's like, "Yeah, you do need an operating agreement." And the banker tries to print one offline. And the client's feeling uneasy about this, send it over to me, and I'm glad that they did. I set them up with a multi-member LLC taxed as a partnership. Well, this operating agreement had them as a single member LLC taxed at a C corp, which again, I talked about that earlier. That a C corp, you're looking at double taxation. That means there's money's taxed when it comes in, and it's taxed when it goes back out to you as personal. You don't want to do that, especially with their business model. Now, have they been audited by the IRS? And the IRS will ask for the operating agreement. They would have looked at that and said, "Oh, sorry, you're supposed to be taxed as a C corp," and they could use that against you, right? Or if you have an operating agreement and you want to be taxed as an S corp, your operating agreement needs to say that you have the ability to be taxed as an S corp. If somebody is donating property as part of what they are contributing in that business, that needs to be reflected in the operating agreement in both the capital contributions, and it needs to be reflected in the in a provision that talks about the tax ramifications of contributing property. This is one contract. I'm talking about your operating agreement. Every contract out there has those pitfalls where people don't realize what they're putting into this agreement, because a lot of it looks like boilerplate and legalese, and so much of it is, but it still serves a purpose. There's a reason that it's there. And if you don't fully understand what that contract is saying, that's a problem. So you can hire us to review that, but I'll also give this warning. Sometimes people think it decreases attorney fees if they create the contract themselves and then bring it to me. Well, oftentimes I now have two steps. If you hire me to draft the agreement, I draft up the agreement and we're good, and I walk you through it. But if you bring me a different agreement, I have to do two steps. I have to tear apart your old agreement and then rebuild it from the ground up. I actually have to put in more time with the contracts that you bring me, that you find offline, if you want me to use that as the foundation of building it. Now, if you send me some samples, and if you give me the contract that you have been working with as guidance to say, "Hey, I like these provisions, these are some of the things that I think are good," all right, that's fine. I can build those into mine, and that's still the one step. But just a caution out there for one, if you pull something offline, you got to make sure you know what it says, because there's sometimes where a line will say something, and so one person can read the sentence "time is of the essence" to mean, "Oh yeah, time's important." It's another thing. That clause means something different in the law. It's much more stringently construed, and those are important aspects. Again, that's a single sentence I'm just pulling out of a contract that you'll find in a lot of contracts. It's important to know what those mean in the legal context. That doesn't mean they need to be confusing. I can explain all of them to you so you know what your contract says. But that is an important aspect. So, brother, thank you for bringing that up about the filing the LLC, which is simple to do. You should not pay hundreds upon hundreds of dollars to do it. You might pay a little bit for somebody with experience to help you launch that properly, but no, you should. I mean, I had somebody paying $800 to launch this LLC with their EIN. No, that's way too ridiculous, right? And so, and like I said, if you hire us, oftentimes we just build that into something you've already hired us for. So anyway, those were great warnings. Thank you, Barbara.
Definitely. And in fact, one of the people who I recently dealt with who had paid close to $1,000 for their attorney to do LLC and EIN for them. And it was a month later and neither of them had been done yet. And I thought, those literally take like 15 minutes. Like, I could show you how to do it right now. And of course, I ended up giving them Isaac's information in case things didn't work out with their attorney. I never would talk bad about somebody else or another attorney or business or anything like that. But if it doesn't work out, if it's not meeting your standards, there are other options out there. Just like in the medical industry, if you don't feel like something is to your standard, you might get a second opinion, right?
And that's huge. I never dissuade somebody from working with somebody that they trust. I'd say trust is the top thing that you should have with anybody who's advising you, whether that's an attorney, an accountant, an insurance agent, financial advisor, your realtor. If you trust that professional, right, then that goes above pretty much anything else. The next one down is capability. But if you really trust that person, right, they should be acting in your best interest, which means if they're not capable, they're either going to learn it or they're going to bring in an advisor to help them understand that, right? I've had to do that. I had to do that. I actually did it a lot when I first started too, where I was going to act in the best interest of my client. And I'm always honest. Again, part of being a team player means that there's a team. The reason for the team is because I don't do everything, and I know that, right? And I'm upfront with my clients, so they can trust me when I say, hey, I don't do that, but I have this person that does. They trust that I know what I'm talking about, because then when I say, hey, I can do this, that means I can do that, right? And so they trust me to have that discernment to be able to advise them in that fashion, and that's big. But if you trust somebody, that's the top one, and I don't like to ever dissuade somebody from somebody that they trust. And so that is a big aspect. I wanted to compliment you on that aspect of it. And I'll also say, with a slight disclaimer, I know that Barbara doesn't advise people on whether they should be an LLC or a corporation. That is legal advice, and I know she's not doing that. But actually forming an entity in any state is not actually considered legal advice. That's why sites like LegalZoom can do it, because LegalZoom is not a law firm, and they're not lawyers. Yeah, they advertise for other lawyers, but they're not a law firm, and they don't practice law. They're not supposed to, right? They reach that line quite a bit there, but fundamentally, they're not a law firm. They're not allowed to give legal advice. So they can't tell you whether you should be an LLC or corporation. That's legal advice. But they can help you walk through. And that's why you'll find a lot of non-lawyers giving advice on how to launch an entity, because launching the entity is not legal advice. You can do that without practicing law. But what you can't do is advise whether somebody should be an LLC or a corporation or a PC or a limited partnership or any other type of business entity. That one's giving legal advice.
Right. And so I have a question in the chat from David. And in fact, I'm glad David asked this, because it was one of the next things I wanted to touch on in regards to this tip. David is asking if you should layer your business with a minimum of 2 or possibly 3 entities to protect yourself against lawsuits, to make it tougher for them to sue your business to pierce the corporate veil. So if it's okay, I want to respond to this first, and then I'm going to let you respond legally. So I'm going to respond first by experience, and then I'm going to let you give the legal advice on it. Okay. So again, from experience, when Isaac and I first started dating, actually, this was moving into our dating time, and my business was a mess as far as legal went. I had a couple of different businesses, but then I also had, Barbara speaking. And so I had all these different things I was doing, and they kind of went together, but they kind of didn't. And sometimes somebody would pay me for this business, even though I did the work from this business, and it was very confusing. And so Isaac noticed it, and he said, "You are at a lot of risk right now." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he started showing me that, like, I shouldn't be doing my marketing stuff in the same business that I'm a virtual assistant in. Like, if I was just doing a little bit of marketing stuff, not a whole marketing firm, that might work, right? But if I have a whole marketing firm underneath the same thing as my virtual assistant and the same thing as my business training, if somebody sued me for a website I built, right, for marketing, I could lose my virtual assistant stuff. I could lose my business training stuff. I could lose everything I'd worked so hard to build. And my first thought was, well, why would someone sue me? I'm honest and everyone likes me. And then he shared with me that, there are some people out there who, no matter, like he shared earlier, you could do everything right and you could still run into problems. Somebody may just be out to want to get some money or whatever. Who knows what the reason might be? Or we're human, right? Sometime in my life, I might accidentally make a mistake that really is a screw up, right? And thankfully, I haven't done something that big yet. But so what he helped me do at that time is he introduced me to the concept that he talked about earlier, as a series LLC, to where now I have, for lack of understanding, or because I didn't understand it very well, is, let's call this the parent company, because it's actually called the master LLC. But from my understanding, I was able to comprehend it better by calling it a parent company. And then all these companies down here, which legally I think are called series, but I call them child companies because, again, it's easier for me to understand. So my parent company, or my master LLC, is called Fuse Empire. But then I have all these legs that come off of it, right? Fuse Marketing and Media, Fuse Business Training, Fuse Virtual Assistant, Fuse Book Publishing, all these different legs that are protected in their own. But it was important that Isaac shared with me too, the importance that each of those had to have their own LLC, they had to have their own bank accounts, they had to have their own operating agreements. They all have to be fully separated from each other to be fully protected. And so that's my experience with that. But I'm going to see, Isaac, if you have anything else that you think is important to add from a legal aspect, please share.
Thanks, Barbara. And thank you for the question, Dave. This is a really great question because I see a lot of people, what they try to do is they're like, well, I want to enter into this other LLC underneath another LLC, right? And provide that double layer of protection. And I'm not going to say that that's wrong because there's times where that makes sense. But let me explain some of these, the principles behind this. This does fold into, though, that larger sphere. It's not just a legal answer. There are some other aspects that come into play when you're talking about whether or not you should layer up your entities in that manner. All right, so let's talk about first, there's the 3 categories that I use to determine whether something should be in a separate LLC. All right, first one, sometimes it's geography. There are certain businesses that if you're going to be in a different state, sometimes it makes sense to just launch it in that other state as a completely separate entity because you're going to have to foreign register it anyway. I do this a lot with the real estate investors, where a real estate investor will have a separate property that they're buying over in this separate state. Well, that makes sense. You're going to have to foreign register that your LLC. Foreign register means that basically you take this LLC that's domestic to Indiana, you launched it in Indiana, and you bought a property in Illinois. Well, you could put that same property in this, but you're going to have to take this LLC and go to Secretary of State of Illinois and get it registered over there anyway. It's all like almost all the same steps. Sometimes it makes sense to be 2 separate entities, but sometimes even within the same state. And if a particular municipality, there's certain zoning issues or certain things that you have to follow at the local level that are extra stringent, or certain parameters that are extra risky to you, okay, maybe then it makes sense for you to separate those out. The business aspect of that will come into play. We'll talk about kind of those other things that you have to balance, though, to make that decision. But first one is geography. The second one that I look at is risk. If you have, what types of risks are you associated with that business? If you're doing book publishing and you're doing marketing, right, those are 2 separate risks that you're dealing with. And sometimes this is, and I'll say that a lot of times this can be reflected in your insurance that you get, right? What insurance are you getting? The insurance that you get for book publishing is completely different than your insurance that you get for marketing because the risks are completely different, right? If you have a consulting business and you also, sell widgets, okay, those are 2 separate risks. There's a product liability insurance and you're doing consulting, which means professional liability insurance. The insurance isn't going to cover the same thing because you're facing 2 different risks and 2 different people. So what risks are you associated with? This also matters with what kind of target clients you have. If you have a business that does high-end consulting with very, very high-end top 10% kind of people, and then you have this other business that sells like the cheap dollar store kind of merchandise, again, that's another example of the risk there, where the people at the cheap, you don't want them to get access to the money that you're making up here at the high end, right? This right here is going to be what risks are you facing and associated with this, and this flows into the next part, which is, well, what did you put into this entity, and who did you enter into this entity with? This is investment, all right? So geography, risk, and investment. Investment in this, sometimes that means, or let me say that the person suing that entity can only get to the assets within that entity. Again, you can say, look, you're not suing me personally, you're suing this entity over here. But if this entity is holding all of your rental properties or all of the manufacturing, all the equipment, okay, they can still get to all of those assets. And so I've had times where I've taken a entity like a creative professional, right, like a videographer or a photographer, I took their equipment, set it up in a separate LLC, and rented it back to them. Now this is a separate company. It needs to legitimately set up, and when I do that, it's usually because the equipment is extremely expensive. We're talking $50,000 of their equipment that they also sometimes lend to other people, right? They rent this stuff out. So this becomes an equipment rental business that's functioning over here. And that's not the primary thing that they focus on, but it really is its own business with its own bank account that functions, and it leases this equipment to their photography or their videography business. And that's one example of doing 2 separate entities, and neither have ownership in the other one, right? When you start talking about stacking entities, saying, I want to enter into an LLC with this one, we're going to come to that because there's some business principles that come into that, as well as tax principles. For other aspects of investment, if you have two separate LLCs and they have different types of investors, so you went to one investor, and I'll tell you, this is somebody who's a partner, they're heavily ingrained, they're helping you manage it, but they injected a lot of cash in, that might be different from the investor over here who's really hands-off and passive, and you want to run with this one, and you don't want that person to have much of a say, right? You can't have the same operating agreement if it's an LLC or same bylaws for both of them, right? You need to run these things separately. And otherwise you're going to start commingling where you're getting your money, and the responsibilities are going to get messy, right? So where's your money coming from? This also matters with financing. If you have an SBA loan, sometimes a very strict SBA loan, like on a building, there's something called a commercial mortgage-backed security. That's a really fancy loan that has a lot of strings tied to it. If you start up if you have another company, don't have that underneath that same one. You're going to tie all those strings to this other company. So the strings that are tied with where you're getting your investment from matter to determine whether it should be a separate entity or not. Now, let's jump into the stacking aspect. All right, when you're talking about stacking these things up, you're looking at one, some extra bureaucratic headache, two, you might be tripping over some tax regulations, and three, it might not be helping you do anything big. All right, so let's go into those. I said every single entity needs to have a separate bank account. If you are just having an LLC that you own 100% of, and it owns another LLC that you own 100% of, there's no need for this little LLC. You're adding an extra level of bank account to a business that's not doing anything. And if you were to walk into court, all they're going to do is say, what is the point of, you're only going to confuse the judge, and they're not going to understand why. And they're more likely to just combine those into one thing. Now, if you have an entity that's renting to someone else, to another one, that's different, right? You own 100% of both of them, but each have their own sovereign purpose, right? Versus here, if it's not serving any extra purpose, well, the judge might not give it any extra weight, right? Now, this is me coming from your business standpoint, where you are now paying for, and you might be paying for insurance on both of them. You might be paying for an extra level of liability that you isn't providing you with any additional liability, so long as you just respect the corporate veil on this one down here. However, a lot of times I see this where someone enters in as an LLC versus an individual, and they're both entering into the same LLC, right? Okay, that type of stacking, it might be useful. Let's say that you have this individual that is entering into this LLC with a company that has 2 or 3 investors in it. Okay, well now you have a holding company that is really managing the funds on that. And watch out if you're doing this with securities regulations. There's a lot of trouble that you get into there. But let's just assume you've done this properly, and that these investors are really in this investment LLC, and they're investing into one of their things, which is going to be this LLC that you might be managing. Okay, now at that point, maybe it makes sense for them to be in their own LLC, and maybe even for you to be in your own LLC too. But let me tell you, one of the tax ramifications of this is that LLC at the bottom can't be taxed as an S corp now. There are 4 requirements to being able to be taxed as an S corp to take advantage of that self-employment, to avoid those self-employment taxes. The 4 requirements are: 1, you must have under 100 shareholders. Usually that's not a problem. Just have less than 100 owners, right? 2, they must be U.S. citizens. Sometimes that's a problem. It depends if that somebody is, they can be residents too, but they have to be here in the United States, right? They can't be foreign to take advantage of it. 3, you can't have what's called more than one class of share. Basically, no one gets preferred dividends. No one's getting paid out first. If you give a distribution, you're giving it to everybody equally. If you're giving dividends, you're giving it to everybody equally, based off of their ownership percentage. That doesn't mean if you have a 90% and I have 10%, that we have to do 50-50 split. No. You get when you get paid your 90, I get paid my 10. When I get paid my 10, you get paid your 90. When distributions go out, they all go out at the same time. There's no preferred distributions, okay? So not multiple classes. But the final one is that it must be individuals. It can't be an entity. So an LLC cannot be the owner of an LLC taxed as an S corp. You're tripping up on the 4th one that I talked about, having an ownership. Same thing with trust. You can't have a trust to own an LLC, except in very limited circumstances for limited purpose of time. And that gets into a complex aspect of it. But fundamentally, you might be limiting what you can do tax-wise with your LLC. So I talked about where, and I already hinted in where it just might not be doing anything. If you have those double layers, you're adding extra layer of bureaucracy that might just be costing you more overhead, and it's not worth it. And then there's times where you want to, where it's just going to cause you tax problems. So don't overcomplicate it if you don't need to, even though there are definitely times, especially if you're dealing with investors, if you're dealing with a really sophisticated aspects of real estate, there's a lot of times where it does make sense to have those 2 aspects. But don't jump into it automatically just because you heard it might provide you some more limited liability. Again, there's times where it's just not worth the headache to do them as two separate entities, and that's me taking it from a business approach here. Again, an entrepreneur with a law degree, giving some insight, and then providing the legal advice on the back end for the execution.
So as you guys can see so far, just with the first 4 tips, there is a lot that goes into these things. And if you're like most people who don't have law degrees like myself, it can sometimes feel overwhelming and confusing. And if you're looking for somebody to talk to be able to understand it better, or even if you think you know that you're in the best situation for yourself, or you've got an idea of what you think is good, that's something that you could call Isaac's firm about. And we'll make sure that on this video that I include the website and the phone number so that you can reach out to Isaac and his firm for these different needs. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to open up in the chat and on Facebook. If you have any questions, ask them there. I'm going to have Isaac tell us tip number 5, and then we will open up for questions. But you want to ask your questions now because we're not going to leave it open too long after. So if you've got a question, put it in the chat now while Isaac tells us about tip number 5.
All right. Your taxes. I just noticed I was muted that whole time. All right, let's talk about number 5 of the top 5 ways to limit your liability. All right, we talked about watching who you work with, talked about your contracts, talked about insurance, talked about the stopping with your limited liability company or your corporation. Finally, it's record keeping. All right, record keeping. I know, another appealing, attractive topic, but there are 3 things that really come into play when you're talking about record keeping. Number 1 is preventing and protecting against liability. 2 is your taxes, and 3, data analytics. All right, number 1 is protecting and preventing against liability. Let's say that you have a client agreement, and we'll take the example of the contractor doing some work. All right, well, this client says, hey, you were supposed to replace that entire wall. And you can bring out your contract and say, no, you look here, it just says I was supposed to paint that wall. You didn't hire me to do anything else. This is what it was. And that client will go, oh. And that's it. That's the end of the dispute. However, if they still want to fight you on it, you can go into court and you can lay down this piece of paper. It's no longer a he said, she said. It's a he said, and you bring down a piece of paper and they have to fight against that. It provides you more credibility. It's what's called usual business records in the court of law. When I step into court, I like to say, any fact that we present, I want to be able to back it up with a piece of paper. It provides you with credibility and reliability, so that court is more likely to find in your favor. And so that's where it's going to first prevent liability, but it'll protect it if you do need to step into court. Number two is going to be taxes. All right, first, if you walk into your accountant's office and you have a jumbled mess of papers that are all over the place, that's going to be tough for them to get your taxes filed. But if you walk in with a flash drive that has everything categorized by month, by expense underneath that, or using QuickBooks and you categorize everything appropriately, tax filing is going to be a lot easier. But it also helps if you get audited. So one, while it prevents you from getting audited because everything was in order, if you do get audited, you can clearly lay everything out, and that auditor will like that. They like the organization of it. So you want to be organized, and it can help you if you do get audited. And finally, data analytics. This is a great topic, and it's really a great way to grow your business. So you're not just growing it on a whim, but rather you're using hard data to know how to move forward with your business. Now, in data analytics, for me personally, I keep track of my clients and where they came from. Right? I did an analysis, and I saw that in 2018, 49% of my clients came from other attorneys. In the next year, I noticed that 47% of my clients came from other attorneys. Guess who my target market is? Right? It's other attorneys. That's who I'm taking out to dinner, right? And I can look at each one of those attorneys and know who I'm going to be sending a Christmas basket to, right? So keeping an analysis of your clients as well as your vendors, as well as your products to know how to make them better, those are all data points that you can keep. And if you can analyze that data properly from your records, then you're going to be able to improve your business. So those are three major aspects that you can do to make sure that record keeping is done properly, to prevent and protect that liability, to do your tax liability, as well as improve your business through data analytics. And so ultimately, that is the fifth and final way of the top 5 ways to limit your liability.
Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. So far we only have one question. So I'm going to give you this question, and then I'm going to let you transition that question into how they can reach you and what your firm offers. So the question we have is from 𝘵𝑩𝘪𝘴, and he asked, Isaac, are you licensed as an attorney in Illinois?
I am not, no. So I have my license in Indiana, and I actually just got accepted to Michigan, so I'm finalizing that now. And Illinois will probably be the one that I move on to next. There's a lot of times that I'll advise people, not a state-specific law, but it depends on your business. So I serve as, you could say, general counsel for a lot of businesses all over the nation. I have clients in California, I have clients in Arizona, I have clients in North Carolina. I've even had Canadian clients, right, that were transacting business, and I was able to give them guidance on the business aspect as well as legal insight. And I function as kind of the general counsel, outsourced, of course, right? I wasn't employed by them, but they hired CCSK to really serve as that general counsel, to give them advice. But whenever we needed something state-specific, we brought in a state-specific attorney. So if it was something for them out in California, we'd bring in the attorney. What I was able to do was able to cut through a lot of the legal jargon. I was able to identify issues, and I was able to do it with a trusted relationship and be able to give them that advice that cut down on so many of their costs that they would have had if they just went straight to that California attorney or North Carolina attorney or something else. So that right there, being able to cut through the weeds and get right to the chase and then supplement what those other attorneys are doing while ultimately getting their approval, is a way that relationship works to be able to work with them. I do have a client right now facing some litigation. He wants me there by his side. The litigation is taking place in Arizona, and it's a Chicago attorney, but he wants me there reviewing these documents to make sure that I can interpret it, because we have that relationship. So there's a lot of clients I have that all over the place. When it comes to specific Illinois law, I don't have my Illinois license. Again, I'm working towards it, and there are plenty of great Illinois lawyers that I work with who are dual licensed or just located over in Illinois, and I work with them quite a bit. And if we ever do a free initial consultation, right, I always like to leave my people off in the right step. So that will mean that we'll at least point you in the right direction to either a group of attorneys or maybe a particular attorney. we'll do our best to move forward with that so that you have a next tangible step with an attorney who can help you if we cannot.
Great, thank you, Isaac. And so let us know the different areas that you guys practice in over at CCSK Law, where you're located, how people can reach you. Give us that contact info.
All right, so at CCSK Law, we're really dedicated to simplifying the law. It's a common mission that we all have in common, to lowering those hurdles for our clients, to make sure that when we're talking to you and not at you, and we're not talking down to you, but rather again with you. Those are key aspects of CCSK, and it's what brings us all together. However, we focus on our practices. All of my clients are businesses and business owners, all of them, right? So I do business in real estate because oftentimes my business owners flow into the real estate market quite often. And so, but all of my clients focus on that. And we have the business development group where I have a group of attorneys, and that's what we focus on. I don't do estate planning, but I work with 𝘷𝘩𝘯𝘬𝘳𝘕, who leads up our estate planning, what we call our life planning group, right? He leads that up, and he's great at what he does. And so when I go into succession planning for a business, about how to hand it off, how to prepare your business to do a handoff if something happens to you, I work with 𝘷𝘩 to make sure your estate is done properly. We have our family law attorney and our bankruptcy attorney, all within our consumer services. So we have something for consumer services, or what we call consumer life, which is that family law, because business owners are still people. Right? They still have that effect. But I'm not going to be the one dealing with child custody. I'm not going to be dealing with divorces. I'm not going to be dealing with bankruptcies, because that's not what I do. I help your business grow, and we do have a litigator. He steps into court, and man, he's always ready to go into court when we need him. That's fantastic. It's what he does, and it's what he enjoys, and those aspects. So each attorney dives deep into what they do. None of us consider ourselves general practice attorneys. None of us are general practice. Rather, the firm has a number of different areas that we cover, but each one of us dive deep into that, and we work, again, that team approach that I keep bringing up, that team approach of where I know that handoff to my litigator, I know that handoff to our family law attorney, I know that handoff to our life planning attorney. We have these systems in place to be able to work together. We can provide a team approach, and this is something else that's fantastic, is that we do everything we can so we're not double billing it, right? So that it doesn't show up as two attorneys running it. We make sure that we hand off cost efficiently for you as well. So those are some of the key aspects that we do, and we're able to work as a system to take care of our clients, regardless of where they're coming from, to make sure that they feel like they have that quality service, regardless of the practice
area. And you guys are located over in Valparaiso, Indiana, right?
So our office is in downtown Valpo, 57 Michigan Street, right over there by Jimmy's Cafe. Northwestern Mutual's in that same building, and Pittsburgh just moved in. It's a great location because we have our own private parking spot next to the fire station. So our clients are able to park in that parking lot and walk right in the door. Honestly, we love that location, and it's been great being downtown Valpo. Even though, like I said, I got clients all over the place. I have people with investments down in Indianapolis, or who are up in Chicago, or all over the nation, and it really depends what kind of law we're dealing with them on them. Even though a number of them do obviously have a tie to Indiana, and so that's an aspect. So we're located locally though, and you can always come down to the office, of course, within the social distancing parameters of what we're doing right now. But we're going to be downtown Valpo, and we're continuing to expand offices. We just actually moved into a second office up in Chesterton, right? And that's a great next move for us, to make sure that we're appealing to a new audience and really reaching a new target, and making sure that our clients are best taken care of wherever we're moving into. And so that's where we're located. You can always reach out to us electronically. We do a lot electronically, especially over the past couple months, right? And so people feel free to give us a call at 219-230-3600. You're going to reach Jen, our receptionist. She's fantastic, and she'll be able to point you in the right direction to the right attorney. Or you can email. If you want to email me, it's Isaac@ccSKlaw.com. That's Isaac as in ISAAC, and at ccSKlaw.com, which is also our website, ccSKlaw.com.
Now, Isaac, I know that you have a form that when you do this top 5 ways to limit your liability in person at speaking events, you have a form that you leave with people, a worksheet, if you will, that they could fill out and remember these things. Is it okay for them to request that via email from you?
Of course. Yeah, if you'd like to take a look at that form, it's got the blanks in it, but we can fill them in if you want to set and see how those blanks can be filled in for your business.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And actually, I'm going to throw in one last thing here before we go, because I know that about 90% of my followers who may be watching this are faith-based entrepreneurs. So I do want to make a note that all three of the partners at CCSK Law are faith-based business people. And so if that's something that you enjoy working with, I know that I've had a lot of people tell me that one of the reasons that they chose me over another marketing company was because of my spiritual beliefs. Now, while not everybody goes around flaunting their spiritual beliefs or pushing them on anybody, sometimes it's important to know that you are working with people who have the same values as you. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Isaac, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's hard for me not to show the glory of the Lord as I am a faith-based man. So that definitely comes out. But yeah, as something that we see in principles in our own lives, is that the way we walk is not to push it upon anybody else, not to force it upon anybody else, but rather to show by our actions, to show that our business is giving into the community and not just taking. By the way that we walk and hold our attorneys high, and really hold our clients to a high step, making sure that they're taking care of best interest of their client, right? The steps that we take, the actions, we want that to show. So it's not something that we're always just going to talk about and push on people. That's not what we do. No, but rather we let our actions speak for that. And if anyone ever wants to talk about it, oh, I can help. I love it. I love talking about that aspect of business. So if anybody ever wants to talk about what it means to be a kingdom-driven business, a faith-based business, any of that those are aspects that we do strive for at CCSK Law. Even though, like I said, we don't flaunt it, but we hope that the way that we walk and the way we hold our business up makes people go, wow, they're doing something differently. They're doing something right. And we hope that reflects the fact that we are a faith-based.
Thank you so much, Isaac. So on behalf of everybody who might be watching this, I want to thank you for the time that you've given us and these tips. And to everybody who is watching, if you still have questions or you're really excited to talk about law or any of the things we talked about today with Isaac, you know how to reach him. He shared it. I'll put it in the comments here too, just in case it got by you. I'll make sure to post in the comments his contact information. Thank you so much, Isaac.
Thanks for having me.